Okay, thank you, Lori, and thank you, everyone. So I think all of us in preparation wanted to kind of discuss different aspects about how to prepare for future emergencies. So I'm going to share a couple things that Common Ground has been focusing on and what our strategy has been thus far. And the other panelists will touch on some other strategies you can be using as well. One of the things I wanted to start with to just kind of put some framework around my remarks is to talk a little bit about Common Ground so you have a sense of the scale and size of our organization and the effect that Sandy had in thinking about if these tips are good for you and your agency or not. So Common Ground currently operates 3,200 units of affordable and permanent and transitional housing in northeastern U.S., mainly in New York City and some of the surrounding areas. We have approximately 1,000 additional units in the pipeline that will be coming online for Brooklyn and the Bronx. So the majority of our focus is here in the city, but we have over 13 sites, so we're a pretty big organization. During Sandy, we had 4 buildings without power for 5+ days, which was over 1,000 units in downtown. So one in Chelsea, one in the Flatiron area, Lower East Side, and the Bowery. So we were right in the heart of it. As someone who kind of slept overnight in one of those buildings, I'm sure my experience was similar to many of yours in dealing with not only tenants, but staff, facilities-related issues, programming-related issues, kind of understanding all of the ways probably we weren't as prepared as we maybe would have hoped to have been under emergency circumstances. And that really led us to think about how do we want to be prepared going forward, given the scope of the number of people that we're really responsible for, if we consider all the tenants and all the buildings and all the staff members that we need to take care of. So after Sandy, we pulled everybody together that was affected, mainly in those 4 sites, but as well as our facilities staff, our security staff, to kind of debrief that situation to say, what did we learn? I think one of the things I really appreciated and took from that experience was how much skills and knowledge we already have on site. And we didn't want to lose all of the learnings that we had gotten during Sandy, and to use the skills that we already have available to us. So we pulled everybody together and documented all the lessons learned from that experience. We identified where we were strong and maybe didn't need to invest as much time in moving forward, where we had some weaknesses. And I think one of the things that we really realized is we didn't necessarily have the time to future plan in the way we would have liked to by using our in-house staff. So we decided to hire a consultant so that we weren't taking staff time and resources away from our daily operations, and we could bring in external expertise. So we hired a consultant who already had connections with FDNY, with OEM, with Red Cross, Salvation Army. So she could be telling us things that we didn't know already, and we could be providing her with the expertise on our program and be teaching her about supportive housing, about our philosophy and mission statement, so she could kind of bring this more emergency focus and we could bring the supportive housing focus, and together we would really be able to have the whole picture. We also, I think, realized that even though we weren't going to be doing the entire project of pre-planning for future emergencies in-house, there was a need to recognize that we did need to make an internal commitment to the process. So we created a in-house kind of leadership team that was going to spearhead the efforts. It included myself to kind of represent building operations, our facilities staff to ensure the kind of physical plant aspect was covered, someone from our outreach team to have more of the clinical focus, someone from our main office, so that we could kind of cover all of our bases and making sure we were moving the project in the right direction and giving the consultant whatever feedback she needed. But this requires from administrative perspective that you're willing to use staff time to prepare. I think a question everyone will ask is, how are we paying for it? As a company, we decided it had to be a priority. Given our experience in Sandy, we just have to be prepared for the next whatever it is. And so we set aside between $27,000 to $40,000 to pay the consultant out of our operational budgets across buildings. So we took that out of various budgets across our sites. But it clearly has to be a priority for your agency. And what we decided once we'd had a couple meetings with our consultant was that we wanted to create an emergency plan template. So we were going to use, or we are using, one building as the kind of test site, but to create a template that we can use across our sites. So we're trying to kind of conquer a bunch of different obstacles with one bullet, I guess. In Common Ground's portfolio, we have old buildings that are rehabs that date back to early 20th century. We have new buildings that we built 3 years ago. We have buildings as small as 60 tenants. We have buildings as big as 600 tenants. We're trying to help all of those sites be prepared, and it's hard to kind of customize, okay, you're going to do one thing and you're going to do something else. We want to hold everybody to the same standard, but also recognize that different buildings have different needs. So the idea is to be able to create some consistent procedures across sites while also recognizing different places have different resources available to them and different capabilities. So one of our buildings has a generator, other buildings don't. Some of our buildings have really seasoned expert staff, others have newer staff, and we want to be able to give them a tool that everybody can use. It also forced us in creating this template, and will be forcing us in a future way, to think about what are our organizational expectations for the staff. So it's not just about making sure that our tenants are prepared or the facility and physical plant is prepared, but what are our expectations for our staff? I mean, during Sandy, it pretty much was like, anyone who's available, come on down, and we'll figure the rest out later, right? I'm sure that's how a lot of you felt, but it clearly was, we could do that once, but we can't do that again. And so we want to be able to have clear messaging to the staff about who's expected to be on site, who doesn't need to be here. If you're having a personal emergency, how are we going to help deal with that? Those kind of questions as well. And in addition to that communication piece, so how do you want to get information to your staff? Is it a hotline number? Is it a website? How are you going to disseminate information during an emergency? So the idea of the template is not only to, at the end of the day, have a booklet that you can give to someone, but also to be using it as an opportunity to kind of think through some of these procedures in advance. And I think the last, piece of the template that was important is, kind of anticipating to make things as simple as possible. So, I always say to the consultant, like, when I'm freaking out, I want this to be as simple as possible. I shouldn't have to read 5 pages to figure out what I'm supposed to do. So we're trying to include as many checklists, really simple step 1, step 2 type directions, so that you don't have to be, a facilities manager for 10 years to figure out what you need to do, especially when you think about, at my site during Sandy, I was kind of the acting director at that time. The prior director wasn't there, the facilities director wasn't there. So I need something easy that I can use if the kind of head people aren't around. So So here's an example of one kind of piece of the template that we'll be using across buildings. So the idea is you want an incident team. So if an emergency happens, who's responsible for what, and kind of thinking this through ahead of time. Here's kind of a template in the works that we're using. So the idea would be at every site, different people would be assigned to these different roles. Given that different buildings have different staffing patterns, we didn't want to necessarily say the person in X position fills X role, because maybe every building doesn't have that person. But to be thinking about these things in advance and to create a template that can be used company-wide, but also be personalized at the same time. So kind of the last point, I guess, in thinking about preparation and what Common Ground has been doing beyond kind of the nuts and bolts and like in hand, we have a booklet and here's your emergency plan, was just to be able to think about anticipating the variety of emergencies. And I think one of the things that happens often is we get caught up in preparing for like Sandy Part 2. When most likely the next emergency you experience isn't going to be the same as the one before. And so using, in our case, using this template and using this booklet as a way to not only think about, okay, if Sandy happened again, what would we do? But what are other potential emergencies, and thinking them through ahead of time. So how would we want to do shelter in place? How would we want to do an evacuation if we needed to evacuate the building 24 hours? Or 48 hours, or a week, and thinking through not only the logistics of it, but the communication of it, the staffing of it. How would you create re-entry procedures? How do you turn your boilers on or your elevators back on? And thinking through other types of emergencies, a fire, a bomb threat. You know, there's a lot of different things you can use your planning as a way to consider. We also wanted to use it as an opportunity to think about training. I think something maybe we're a little weaker in. So as we kind of create this tool, the last thing we want is to have this tool, we give it out, and everybody puts it on their bookshelf and never looks at it. So how do we, A, want to roll it out, and B, make sure that it's fresh? Because the more prepared you are, obviously, the easier it's going to be when the emergency comes. And then, you know, to what I was saying before, as far as a communication plan, how do you want to be communicating, both with your tenants and with your staff, and what do you want to be responsible for? So are you going to tell tenants, yep, you know, if we have another emergency, we're going to provide everybody with meals? You may or may not want to take that responsibility on. You know, in our sites, our tenants have leases, they're real tenants. You know, they're not required to be in touch with us in the same way maybe at a shelter people would be. So how do you want to stay in communication with people? How, you know, while kind of respecting that they're, you know, adults, that they have families, that they can make these choices on their own, but stay in communication. So is that a website, a hotline? Do you give out wristbands? How do you want to, what's the most effective way to kind of make sure everybody's clear on your plan? So I think those are some of the big takeaways in how we've been preparing. The consultant has been a huge help in kind of helping us wrap our arms around a big company with a lot of units scattered throughout the city, and thinking about our kind of best practices from both like a physical plan, a tenant, and a staff standpoint.